friends, it's Carolina Moore, your favorite sewing and quilting YouTuber, and today I'm going to show you 2 different ways to do applique on gnome blocks. This is part of the Christmas in July series that I'm doing. Today is the very first video of that Christmas in July series, so follow along as we have lots of fun making different Christmas projects here in July, getting you all ready for December. Friends, if you're not already subscribed, make sure you hit that subscribe button, and let's get right into the video. Happy Christmas in July. This is the first of 8 at least projects that we're going to be doing here in July that are all Christmas themed. Now half of them are going to be based on the templates from the Mini Quilt Advent Calendar. You can see the Mini Quilt Advent Calendar from 2023 finished here. I still have some extra sets, so if you wanted to make that and you wanted to follow along on the 4 free bonus projects that I'm making, go ahead down to the description, get all the details. But today we are going to do applique gnomes using leftover scrap fabric and the AccuQuilt gnome die. I'm going to be using the AccuQuilt Go Me because that is the smallest and most affordable AccuQuilt, and it fits this gnome die. And I'm going to be using Heat and Bond Light as the fusible to fuse this on. We're also using my Baby Lock Jubilant, which is the sewing machine that you see in almost all of my videos, and I have my Aliso Mini heating up here. So let's get started. So I have my fabric pressed, but I haven't done any of the other steps because I wanted you to really see all the steps in order of how you put together an applique. In this case, we're using the AccuQuilt gnome die, but these steps would be the same regardless of which AccuQuilt die you're using. You also don't have to use an AccuQuilt die to do applique. You can find all kinds of applique patterns that you can print out and pin on and cut. And the rest of these steps will all be the same if you're using a print and cut applique pattern. You just won't be using the die, and that's totally fine. So I wanted you to see the whole process so that you understand how it works. We're going to start by cutting our background fabric. So I'm going to set the die out of the way for a minute. I have my Heat and Bond, I'm going to set that out of the way. These are all the little scrap fabrics that I have left over from doing my Mini Quilt Advent. So I'm going to set those out of the way. By the way, any scrap fabrics are great for these appliques, and the gnome is one of my favorites. I'm using my glow ruler here to be able to cut the fabric, and I actually want to start by cutting a nice cutting a nice 2-inch section off of the bottom of this. I like using the selvage. I lost the word there for a second. I like using the selvage for different kinds of selvage projects. So whenever I have a fresh fat quarter, I always cut that selvage off. So I'm going to take that and set it aside. And then I'm going to cut 8.5-inch pieces. Now 8.5 is bigger than the 6.5 of this glow ruler, so I'm just going to cut it on the ruler. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I counted those out here on the mat since my ruler is more than 6.5 inches. And I'll have a little bit left over on this fat quarter. I decided to go with 8.5-inch blocks. Now there is an AccuQuilt die that will cut an 8.5-inch block, but it doesn't fit on the AccuQuilt Go Me. You need a larger AccuQuilt for that. So that's why I'm not using AccuQuilt to cut the blocks. But I went with 8.5 because a fat quarter is 18 by at least 20 inches. And so this will give me 4 good sized blocks. And my gnome is not that big, so it'll fit easily on an 8-inch finished block. Now we say 8-inch finished block, and this is some really cool quilty terminology, and I like to go over quilty terminology whenever we're working on projects. So a finished block is quilty terminology for what size the unit is going to be finished in the quilt. So that subtracts away all the seam allowances of the block. That's why we're cutting these at 8.5 inches, because a 1/4-inch seam allowance all the way around adds a 1/2 inch to both the height and the width. So we're cutting these at 8.5 inches, so they'll be 8 inches finished in the quilt. So 8 inches finished means 8.5-inch cut. 9 inches finished would mean 9.5 inches cut. 9.5 inches finished would mean 10 inches cut. So just add a 1/2 inch to whatever size you want it to be finished at in the quilt, and that's what your cut size is. All right, so let me cut these other ones. 2, 4, 6. I can't count and talk at the same time. So I'm just gonna go ahead and cut these squares out so that we have them prepped and ready to go. And then we're going to fuse the fusible on the back of our fabric to be able to cut our applique shapes. All right, I've moved my cutting mat all the way out of the way so it is not underneath my pressing mat. This is a wool pressing mat, which I think is fabulous for using iron, although I am allergic to wool, so you might see me touching it a little odd because I try not to put too much of my skin on the wool, but wool pressing mats are fabulous. I'm going to open up this Heat and Bond light. By the way, when you're going to sew on it, you really want the light. Sewing through the Ultra, which is the red package, is very difficult, and I found I got a lot of thread breaks when trying to sew through the Ultra, so I always pick the light for projects where I'm going to sew through them, and I am going to sew through these. The Ultra is kind of like an iron-on patch. Okay, so I'm just going to lay this out with the plasticky side up, and these are just scrap pieces, so they're not any like perfect shapes at all, so it might be interesting to puzzle these on. So I'm just going to start by just kind of putting them on, and I like to put the fabric just over the edge so that it extends past the plasticky bit, because once I put the iron on here, I don't want any of this fusible to get onto the bottom of my iron. So I don't mind having it go off the end, and I don't mind having them overlap just a little bit, because that'll keep me from having to clean my iron, and cleaning my iron is not my favorite thing to do. All right, so I have some bits. I do have some fusible showing here and some fusible showing here, so I'm going to be careful around those areas. But I'm going to go ahead and start fusing this on. You can read the package instructions. I just fuse it for a couple seconds. You do want to make sure that it's well fused, because otherwise your fusible will stick to the paper and not your fabric when you're trying to peel it off, and that can be a little troublesome when you've already cut your applique shapes. It's not the end of the world, because you can just go ahead and just fuse them back on, but it's just if you can avoid it. So I'm just going to go ahead and get all these fused on, and then once I'm done there, we will be cutting them apart. All the pieces are fused down. It's time to cut them apart. I'm going to use scissors. These are just my thread snips, but you want to use your not fabric scissors, because your fabric scissors will get dull from the paper on this fusible. And we'd rather not dull our fabric scissors, because they're usually some of the most expensive scissors that we have in our home. So I'm just going to cut these, and I'm cutting them apart where they overlap like this. I'm just kind of cutting over where they overlap. Another option for cutting these apart, if you want more visibility, is to flip it over, and you can usually see from the back where exactly they overlap, and then you can get a better line right across the edge of the fabric, especially when you have a darker and a lighter fabric coming together, like right here. I can see that really well to be able to cut those apart. We're all set to cut out our applique. If you're using a different kind of applique method, you're not using an AccuQuilt die, print out your applique pattern. You can pin those shapes to these and then cut them out. You can trace them on the back. If you're tracing on the back, be careful, because you're doing a mirror image, and for a lot of shapes that doesn't matter, but if you want your bird to face a specific direction, just know that when you're tracing on the back, it's a reverse image, right? This gnome, if you have something like this gnome that you're tracing it's not exactly, well, it's pretty close to symmetrical. The hat does point one way, but for the gnome die, depending on which way we place the fabric down or fabric up, then we'll have the hat pointing different directions. So we definitely can do this in different ways. All right, I've got my little Gnome machine here, and set up on the Gnome is super easy. It's just boom, boom, and she's all set up. This is a crank handle machine, so I will be spinning the handle to get everything through. So we have our die here. We have a hat. There's really no face here for the gnome. It's the hat and then a nose and a beard, and that makes the face of the gnome. There's the body, and then there's 2 feet. Now, personally, I would have loved it if they would have put 2 feet on here. They only put 1. And so that gets a little bit difficult because you can cut 6 layers of fabric at a time. I'll do like 4 or 5 when I'm doing the fusible because there's the paper still on the back. And so that's more layers. But I need 2 feet for every gnome that I do. So I need 4 of these and 2 of each of these to make 2 gnomes. So a little 1.5 inch square is more than enough to do these feet. So I'm going to use my little glow ruler here and cut some little 1.5 inch rectangles, or I guess a 1.5 inch square out of these. And keeping everything right set up with no folds does make it easier. I'm going to go a little less. I'm going to go, this is 1 1/4. I'm not too worried about being super careful or specific. So this is 4 feet, and 4 feet will get me 2 gnomes. So that means I need 2 of every other piece in order to make my little gnome shape. So let's look at the beard next. So I like this for the beard. And for the beard, I need at least 2.5 inches, maybe a little bit bigger. And I like this for the beard up and down. So, I cut here. Aha, I turned my ruler off while I was cutting. Silly me. And I'm going to cut this at 2 1/4. Or sorry, 2 3/4. Give myself a little extra. And then that'll make a perfect beard. And if you look, this little corner is cut off here, but that doesn't matter because of the beard shape. So that's fine. And I'm going to need a second one. Alright, all my little scrappy pieces are cut, so I'm going to take my mat and put it on top, making sure not to shift it, everything or anything. I'm going to tuck it in here and start pushing it through. You can hold on right here if that helps as you push it through, or rotate it through, pull it through, I don't know. Alright, we're going to give it a little bit of friction rub, and then we slide everything off. And some did stick to my mat, that's okay. I need to grab my 4 little feet. 1, 2, 3, 4, yep. I've got my 2 beards. This turned out really cute. My hats, my bodies, and my noses. And then I'm going to put this all out of the way and get my iron out again, because we are going to go ahead and press these all into place before we sew them. We're all set to press. I'm going to grab one of my 8.5 inch cut, 8 inch finished squares, and I'm going to actually just fold this in half this way and just give it a finger press. I don't want like a strong crease in here. I just want a finger press that'll iron out fairly easily. And if I do this both ways, then that lets me know where the middle of my block is, and I have that center as a reference point. And I don't necessarily want everything right in the center. There's something called optically centered, which is the rule of thirds. So if I were to fold this way, kind of like I was putting a letter in an envelope, I could give it a press that way, and that would give me the rule of thirds, where optically this is the center, and that's because of, I don't know, it has to do with faces and where the eyes are or something. I don't know. I didn't take a lot of art classes. I just know that that is optically centered, and so we'll want to consider the rule of thirds, not just the centering, as we put this on. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a body and a beard, and we'll go ahead and start to peel off the paper on these already. Now I'm not pressing them down quite yet, but I'm peeling off that paper backing so that they're ready to press down if I'm happy with where I have them. Now this one is peeling off from the sticky instead of peeling off from the paper, so I'm just going to give that a press real quick, because it means that it didn't iron well enough the first time, and that's okay, that happens. Let's see, if I have this as the beard, I have two that I want to make, so I want to make sure that I'm getting some good contrast. Those red noses will be good. I think we're going to do them like this. Yeah. Centered along that center line. And you want to make sure that you have at least a 1/4 inch from the top of your block, and that's because this needs a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and we don't want to be cutting off the top of our gnome or our little gnome toes when we go to sew everything together. You can decide how much of this body. You can make taller and shorter gnomes if you want. I think that's fun about this die. You can add the feet. Alright, I feel like he's a little high because this is my bottom third, so I want to bring him down a little bit. Yeah, there is a bonus die now for the gnomes that also includes pigtails and all kinds of cute stuff. So I'll link that as well if you want gnomes with pigtails, and I think there's like alternate hats. There's so many cute things in the bonus gnome die. So you might want to get both of them, both the gnome die and the bonus gnome die. Alright, I have this, I think the way that I want it, and I have all those papers removed. So I'm going to start by pressing it down. And I don't want to shift anything, I just want to really just press straight down. Now when we're playing with fusible, there are 3 measurements, I guess, that you want to think of with fusible. One of them is the amount of heat, so how hot your iron is. One is the time, so how long you are pressing in that area. And the third one is pressure, and pressure is the one that isn't talked about much. You want to make sure that there is good contact so that when that fusible melts, it melts into the fibers of the fabric beneath it, and as it melts into those fibers of the fabric beneath it, then it'll cool and catch those fibers and really be put in place. So there we have one gnome. He's all done, or she, I suppose, but that gnome is all pressed together. Now, what if you want to make a bunch of gnomes that are all exactly the same? Or even if you have a single applique, I've done this with a deer head die. So I have a deer head applique, and I want the deer head to be in the exact same spot on every single one of these blocks. I'm going to show you a trick on how to do that, even if your fabric is in a light colored background like this one. So this is actually why I cut 2 gnomes, so that I could show you this trick. So I'm going to take this second fabric, and I'm going to fold it in half and place it right on here. right? And now I'm going to take my gnome pieces. Let's start with the body. I'm going to place it right on top. We're not fusing yet, so don't worry about fusing it to this piece. I'm just going to stick it right on top. And then, let's see, I need my beard next. I'm going to also stick that one right on top, making sure nothing's shifting. There we go. And now I'm going to do the hat. I'm not worried about the nose because you won't be able to tell as much if the nose isn't in place. And now I'm just going to grab just this side with the iron. Hopefully not ironing my fingers. So I'm just going to set this side with the iron. And now, when I flip this fabric over, everything will get pressed in exactly the same spot as it was on the other block. And so each time I'll just use this block as my my measurement block. And you always want to use the same one as your measurement block. I don't want to now use this one as my measurement block. I always want to use the same one because things might shift a little bit, and then so over time you'll get shift. But if you go from this one and it shifts a little bit, and you go from this one and it shifts a little bit, you won't have an over time shift across all of your blocks. And so now I can set this back on here, lining everything up, and I can bring this fabric, come here, bring it over. This is for doing the foot, so I'm going to line up this side here. I can take a foot. Or you can say, I was mostly worried about the position of the body, I'm not so worried about the feet. But you absolutely can take this, and now I'm going to see that edge of the foot right there. Line that up so it's the same. There you go. And I'm going to press. And then again, fold it out of the way and press the rest of the way. I'm actually not so worried about the feet being in the exact same spot every time, so I'm just going to put the other foot and also put on the nose. You can also use rulers to measure and make marks on your fabric to measure exactly where everything needs to go. But I find this faster and easier. And honestly, at least as accurate. Alright, so now we have our two gnome blocks fused on. Because I used Heat and Bond Light, I do need to sew them on. So let's get into the process of sewing these on. Alright, I've adjusted my sewing machine a little bit here so that you can see this part of the machine. And this shows me where all my stitches are. I want to use, this is a 23 right here. You could also use a 24. And it looks like a line with a bunch of just sticks going off of it this way. 37, ooh, I like 37 too. That's another option. It has them going this way. So it also depends which way you want to be stitching. If you want to be stitching so that your little lines, so you're stitching on this side of and the lines are going this way, or you're stitching on this line so the lines go that way. I'm used to stitching next to the right side, so I want one where they go left. So I'm going to go with 23. So here is my number, my stitch number, and I'm going to go all the way up. There we go. And then I want to make sure that I have a presser foot that has enough space for that stitch, since it does go back and forth. Also, for someone who has a presser foot or a needle plate that's a single hole needle plate, you don't want a single hole needle plate. If you don't have or don't know what a single hole needle plate is, don't worry about it. I'm going to go ahead and go with my J foot, which is one of my favorite, and it has this clear section right here, which is going to make it really easy for me to see what I'm doing, especially if I find my reading glasses and put those on. Where are my reading glasses? Oh yeah, right on my head. Easy enough to find them, you would think, right? Okay, so let's go ahead and sew one of these blocks. Now you can start and stop as many times as you need. I like to find a path of travel that causes the least starts and stops. I think starting going around the hat is going to be the easiest to start. It might be a little bit more difficult for you to see it on the black, but if this was your piece, it would definitely be easier for you to hide any mistakes in that darker colored fabric. So we're going to go ahead and start stitching. And I already put the needle down just shy where I wanted it. So I'm just going to bring it back up backwards and bring it back down. There we go. So what it's going to do is a stitch forward, a stitch back, a stitch to the left, a stitch forward, a stitch back, forward, left. And you can pivot as you go, but as you pivot, know that you want to pivot right after it does its left, right. Because if it's going forward and then back and then forward, and you don't want to pivot while it's doing those, you can pivot right before it goes left, right. So right before, right after a left, right is when you can go ahead and pivot the fabric. Let's see, I have my beginning thread tucked in there somehow, so let's get you out of the way. There we are. And this is a slow, tedious process. Now, AccuQuilt does have embroidery files. So if you have an embroidery machine, it has embroidery files that allows you to place and stitch these using your embroidery machine. I don't have a fancy embroidery machine yet. I don't know, maybe I'll go in the future. So for now, I do all of my applique manually. So you can see as you kind of get used to it, you can go a little faster, and especially on like the straighter bits, it's a little easier. And I'm not worried about stitching my finger. I know that's a question that lots of people have, but my fingers are way out of the way. As long as I keep my fingers well away from the presser foot, I have nothing to worry about. And if I'm going to bring my fingers close to the presser foot, like here, to pivot it, I stop sewing first. Alright, I've gone all the way around the little hat, and now I'm going to go around the nose. That's going to be a little more detailed. So I'm just going to stay close and kind of like pivot and curve as I go around the nose. And the more you do this, the more you'll get a feel for when to pivot, when to curve, and how fast you can go. And you'll definitely get faster over time. Or you'll say, I love applique, but I hate this process, so I'm going to get an embroidery machine. And that's also a totally valid option. Big Block has some really great embroidery machines, and one day I may get myself one of those. Alright, once I've gone all the way around, you can stitch a couple times in place to lock your stitches. And then lift your needle up, and I'm going to cut my thread on the top, and then tug, which will bring that thread down to the bottom, and cut any extra threads down here on the bottom as well. And now I have my little nose and my little hat all appliqued on there. Now I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to stitch around the beard and the body and the feet and get this all stitched together. And once I have that appliqued, we're actually going to do a different style of applique stitching on this gnome because I made two. So how about I show you a different method for applique stitching if you want. Alright, I've stitched out the entire little gnome here. Turned out so cute. And I didn't mention the thread I was using. By the way, this is Wonderful thread, and I used black thread for this because I really wanted that stitching to stand out and for you to see it. But you can use whatever color stitching you want. I think white would have looked really great here, or even a light pink. Maybe even like aqua would have stood out nicely against this dark hat. And also have gone with this background, this teal here. So there's a lot of different colors you can use. Some people like to match the thread that they're using to the piece that they're appliquing. So it might have been black here, red here, pink here, black here, and then black down here. You can do that as well. I'm not a huge fan of switching thread colors every time, but you do you. Okay, so I told you I want to show you a different way to stitch this gnome. I want to do this with a straight stitch. Now for this machine, I can bring it all the way back to the number 2, which is what's normal on this machine, or I can turn it off and turn it back on, and it'll set us off. Oh, it's 3 that's normal for this machine. Well, there we go. So that'll bring it back to its normal or traditional spot. Okay, I want to swap out this foot for a free motion foot. So I have the little screwdriver that came with the machine, and I actually need to unscrew the entire foot because this is not a quick change foot like I had before. And I'm going to put on, this is an open toe free motion quilting foot because I'm going to free motion quilt. Now you could do this with the regular foot that we just had on, and then you'd have to turn the whole fabric. I don't want to turn the whole fabric, so this open toe foot is going to allow me to see what I'm doing. Then I'm going to turn the whole machine around here for just a second so you can see here on the back is this thing that allows me to bring the feed dogs down. And that means that the machine is no longer controlling how the fabric is moving. I'm going to be controlling how the fabric is moving. We're going to go ahead and stitch this. Now free motion quilting out here where there's just one piece of fabric would be difficult. You want some kind of stabilizer, but I'm going to keep all my stitching here on the gnome, so I don't have to worry as much about having stabilizer behind it. But if you're going to be quilting out here, you definitely want to put some kind of like fusible fleece or something behind it. Maybe even have this already with a backing on there, and that'll give you some more stability as you're sewing. So I'm going to start here, and when we're free motion quilting, we actually start with needle down, needle up, and then we bring our presser foot up because we're going to pull the bottom fabric up, or bottom thread up, the bobbin, bring up the bobbin thread, the bottom bobbin thread, there we go. And I want to bring this out of the way a little bit, and I'm just going to do a couple stitches and get me started. And remember, I'm the one who's going to be moving the fabric, not the machine. And it takes a little bit of getting used to for how to move the fabric and how your machine likes to move and which ways it likes to move. So give yourself some time to get used to it. Alright, I've gone around the nose a couple times. I want this to get a really sketchy look. I need to move over here so I'm out of the way of these threads. This is my bobbin thread and my top thread, and I'm going to clip these so I don't have to worry about them anymore. Alright, now I'm going to do my hat, and same thing. I'm moving this, and I'm just stitching, give or take about 1/8 inch away from the edge. And this is super imperfect beginner style free motion quilting. And I could go around that nose another time, or I could just go back and do the little hat again. And I don't need these stitches to be exactly on top of each other. I'm going for a really fun sketched look here. And you can see this is a lot faster than the other method because I'm not being as perfect and as precious about getting everything stitched. So with this beard, I'm going to be really intentionally kind of scruffy and out there. I'm going to make these stitches. And here's a spot where I'm really glad that I used that Heat and Bond light, because especially where there's 2 layers on top of each other, the thread would really break if I had a couple layers of that Heat and Bond Ultra, or even 1 layer of that Heat and Bond Ultra. Alright, so I'm hoping that you kind of get the idea of how this works. I'm going to go ahead and stitch the rest of this little gnome, and it's going to actually go, I mean, when I showed you the other one, I just showed you the hat and the nose, and here I'm doing already the beard, so you can see how much faster it is to do this style. However, again, it's less precise and it's a little less precious, but depending on the look that you're going for, this can also be a super cute way to add applique stitching. And also this way you can see I'm doing no thread breaks because I'm going over things multiple times. I think I got a little caught up here, probably got caught in that Heat and Bond a little bit, so I'm going to go ahead and clip this, get this all fixed up. And then I'm going to finish up this stitching of this block, and we'll be back to compare the two. Okay, here you can see the 2 different examples of applique. This one is definitely the more sketchy, and this is the more refined. Now you can kind of see the back a little bit. Some of my thread got caught there, but this one again looks a little more refined, and this one looks sketchy. And I did use a white thread on the back, though when you're first starting you probably want to use the same color bobbin thread as you do on the top. Alright friends, there's our 2 little adorable gnome blocks. I love how they both turned out. Let me know which way you prefer to do your applique in the comments. And remember, this is just the first video of a whole series of Christmas in July projects that we're going to be doing. You can, by the way, make a ton of these, and you can either put them on like different colored backgrounds and put them together like a checkerboard. So this would be 2 of my white backgrounds, and I could do a dark background and put them together as a checkerboard. You could put them all on the same color background and put sashing between and put them together. You can turn these into zipper pouches or bags or pockets, or, I mean, really, the possibilities are endless of what you can do with these fun little gnome blocks. Again, I put the link down below for both this gnome die for AccuQuilt, as well as the bonus die for all the different gnome parts if you want to add on different gnome parts. Friends, that's it for today. Make sure you are subscribed to this channel. If you have any questions or comments, I'll leave those down below, and I will see you right here real soon. Bye for now.